So you guys kind of seen, there's ESM Club Night. Woo woo! We'll start this coming Tuesday. I really wanted to do it via Zoom.
Wednesday?
Wednesday nights. We're switching it, and listen, unofficially, it is officially Wednesday nights, because if you read the Facebook post, we are looking forward to going to Dr. Green's class. He can only do it on Tuesday night. So I took a survey of some of the families that are getting on usually, because they're the ones who read the message, and they said they're okay with meeting on Wednesday night, at least for up until Thanksgiving, and then I think his class is done. It's only 7 weeks. Yeah, but we will continue on up until Christmas time. But ESM Club Nights will be Wednesday night, 6:45 to 8 p.m. via Zoom. Now, if you are on right now, I need you to get on your phone and to say, I have access to Zoom. I'm okay with that. I can do it on my phone. Give me a thumbs up or something, because I don't want the day to come, because I will post the link to Facebook so that those who are used to going there will automatically go there. But there are a handful of students that just been kind of lost. They're not on any social media, so they're not reminded, or they don't want to get on their parents' Facebook to hop on, or they just don't want to get on at all. I don't know. And so I'm hoping that getting their email, interacting with them more, will give them a desire to get on this Zoom call. And another reason is we're starting at 6:45 to give you 10 to 15 minutes to just see each other's faces. Some of us have not seen each other in quite some time, and at first we had that Facebook group chat, so that I called every once in a while, and whoever was available would hop on and hop off, and that was fun. But we haven't done that in a long time. So I'm hoping that we would open up this Zoom meeting time for ESM Club Night on Wednesday at 6:45. Give us about 10-15 minutes to look at each other, to get that all out of our system, then start the countdown, go ahead and use the washroom, get some coffee, water, juice, whatever, and then sit down. And then we would not only be able to share the screen, I think you'll hear it a little bit better, I think you'll see it a lot nicer, and we'll also be able to allow people to chime in real time, to be able to give comments, questions, and what's the last one? Complaints or concerns in real time, if it's appropriate. I mean, I don't want you interrupting my lesson all the time. Say, hey, and pop your big head in there whenever you feel like it. I might just cut you off. But anyway, so ESM Club Nights, Wednesday, 6:45 to 8 p.m. Wednesdays. Keep that in mind. Mark your calendars. Set yourself Wednesdays. And mark your, maybe put a reminder on your phone.
Hey, it says that Robert and Lucy are watching. Maybe that's Giselle.
Hi, Giselle, that's you watching. Hello, we miss you guys
Christianity
very much.
at its core.
Hold on. We're going to hold on to that for a minute. We miss you very much. We hope that you're having a good time out there in Arizona.
Ooh.
And I got to tell you about, I meant to connect your dad with somebody that we know very well. His name is Ninos, and he's a very solid believer. I don't know how close you are in the cities that you live in, but anyway, that's to remind me. You guys here, remind me later on, and maybe we can get them to meet one another out there. All right? So that said, let's watch this, and then we'll move on from there.
Christianity at its core, the same as other religions? If you could put it in a pot and boil it down, wouldn't the remainder smell, look, and taste the same as Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the rest? What is religion? Just as we refer to our minds as being thoughts and ideas beyond the electrical impulses of our physical brain, the major religions propose that the human's true essence is their soul instead of their physical body. But just like our physical bodies, the soul also has needs, or it will starve. Each religion proposes to be a guidebook of that spiritual plane that helps lead our starving souls to soul bread. Aren't these guidebooks all the same? The historical Jesus of Nazareth told a story about a father, 2 sons, and a family business. It was custom that the sons would split the business when their father died. But the younger son said to his father, "I can't wait for you to die. Give me my money now." Seeing his son's true heart, the father gave it up to him. The son turned his back to his family and hit the road. Far away, he partied like an animal, eating and drinking and paying prostitutes, until suddenly his pockets were empty. In desperation, he found a job feeding pigs. But the country's economy crashed, and he couldn't even make enough to feed himself. Now broke and starving, he found himself craving the pig's slop. when it suddenly hit him that there was probably food back home. What do you think? Should this father let him back into the house? As long as the son works hard to pay his father back, then he should be able to get a place at the family table again, right? Let's see how Jesus ended this story. The son decided to return, admit his wrong, and ask his father for a minimum wage job. But still a ways from home, his father spotted him and ran out to him and wrapped him in a bear hug. Remorseful, the son began his plea. Dad, you shouldn't even call me your son anymore. But the father put a fine robe on him and a ring with a family crest. He told his workers, get the best meat and prepare a welcome home feast. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. Although Jesus told this as a story, he was actually presenting his view of the truth. In the story, the Father represents God. So is Jesus seriously teaching that God forgives selfish gluttons before they've repaid their wrongs against him and others? Judaism teaches that one can atone for their wrongs by changing their behavior, praying, and doing good deeds. Islam says we can move towards paradise by performing the 5 pillars. Hinduism claims that if we store up enough good karma, we will reunite with Brahman. Buddhism says we can enlighten and discipline ourselves into nirvana by practicing the Eightfold Path. But in this story, the father embraced his son and fed him before he did any work. Why? Because in Jesus' view, it's impossible for a person to repay God for their bad deeds. God is a perfect judge who cannot be bought off with anything that we have to offer. Jesus said that when we die, we will face God with all of our deeds laid out. None of us is completely morally perfect, and none of us will stand a chance of justifying ourselves. Then, is there hope for us? Jesus believed so, and staked his life on it. He claimed to be God in human form who came to pay our moral debt with his innocent life, so that if anyone truly believed and surrendered to him, they would receive a full pardon from God and the power to change how they live. Other religions teach that our own self-sacrifice can pay our debt, but Jesus taught that only God's own self-sacrifice can pay our debt. All other religious founders claim to be guides to lead our starving souls to bread. Jesus claimed to be the bread our souls starve for.
So we watched this video before, but I thought it's always good. It's concise. It puts it all in a nutshell for you, and you can go back and watch it again and again and again if you want. The gospel needs to be not only something that we speak of, that we proclaim on a weekly basis and also live out, but it should be centered in all that we do, because it's out of that relationship with God, and let me go back a second, out of that relationship with God that our religion comes from. And I don't mean religion as a way to get good, to go to heaven, but because we know that we are going to be in the very presence of God and with God forever, having a relationship with Jesus Christ. Our religion then becomes how we work out what we believe. So I believe that's about to pop up in a second right there. Religion is how we live out what we believe. That's my working definition for the word religion. So last week we talked about relationship and religion, and the law in particular, Deuteronomy chapter 5, because it wasn't the first time the law was given to that generation that disobeyed God, refused to believe in faith that they would take the land. That whole generation died, but a new generation came in. It was the second time they were given the law and that covenant of blessing and curse. In other words, God had a relationship with his people, but he also told them, if you obey, you're going to stay in the land. If you disobey and continue in that disobedience, I will put you out of the land. Right? They had that covenant with God, out of relationship. God gives them law, and we talked a little bit about the purpose of the law, but it was more of the long view, right? Paul, in the book of Romans, book of Galatians, he says that the law was given to point us to Christ, so that all would understand they are sinners, that we all have fault. And then in Galatians, he says that it was given to us as a tutor or as a guide to lead us to Jesus Christ. So that's the ultimate purpose of the law. But even in the Old Testament, the law was not to make them right with God. The law was to show them that they are sinners, but then included in the law was sacrifice that showed them that someone has to pay for all sin, which again points us to the person of Jesus Christ. So today we're going to talk about a little bit more about purpose, practice, and politics of our religion. Why, what, and how we think, say, and do. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but why, what, and how. I changed it a few times. Originally it says, why, what, and how we do what we do.
Ooh.
Right? And then I thought, well, no, it's important we talk about how we think and what we say and what we do, because it's all part of us. It's all part of us. So our lesson series is the grace of knowing. This is where we're going to be camped at for a while. This is the big idea, and I want to bring it at the beginning and at the end. In the beginning, it'll be a bit ambiguous, a bit of a mystery. Maybe like, well, it makes sense, the words, but I don't know how that connects with the lesson. But hopefully, as the lesson progresses, you'll see it perfectly. And then when we bring it up again, it'll be a nice way to wrap it all together. So purpose, practice, and politics. If you have been, I think it's supposed to be a made there. If you have been made right with God, your life should be centered on Him and not you. This new identity should permeate every part of your life, all that you think, say, and do. And this is for everyone, because I don't think the Muslim, the Jewish person, the Hindu, the Buddhist, I don't think they take what they believe and they go to work and forget it, or they only practice that. That's something they only practice in a building or in private. Whatever it is that they believe, whether they are aware of it or not, it's going to affect their every decision, their every thought, and their every action. So, this is our base text for today, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, which reads as follows. Oh no, I lost my spot. I wanted to read it from my Bible. Yeah, here it goes. This is a New American Standard. It reads as follows. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lay down, and when you rise up. So in other words, this is to be part of your every day. From the moment you get up, to the moment you go to sleep, this is all part of your day. All right, this is what he says here. Let's move on. And verse 8, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Miss Dahlia, when we talked about this in years ago, we talked about something called a mezuzah. And a mezuzah is this narrow thing with this shema. This is called a shema, which means to hear. But it's not just a simple word hear. The word hear, it's an imperative. It means that listen, hear what I'm saying, listen to it, and obey it. So it's not just saying, listen to this and figure it out if you want to do it or not. But he's saying, hear this, listen to it, and obey it. So this is the Shema. Bedalia bought one of those mezuzahs, and it's written on this little metal plaque, and we screwed it to the side of our door. So when the doorpost, like it says, so when we go out, she usually puts her hand on it. I don't know if she still does. Puts her hand on it, and then when she comes back in, she puts her hand on it to remember. It's not just what you do inside the house. It's not just what you do inside the church, but it's what you do outside of your house and outside of your church as well. All of it should, what you believe, your relationship with God then becomes your religion out in the world. What you do with what you believe. All right? So, a few things to point out here. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. So he said, O Israel, the people of God, he says, is our God. This is personal. He's not just saying this in general. He's not saying everyone should think the same. But he says, since you are my people, I need to direct your thoughts. Even as me as a loving father, I wanted to direct the hearts and the minds of my children in a very particular direction because I believe it was best for them. I believe it was based on God's truth. And although I didn't do a perfect job, that was my intention when I became a believer at 23 years old. Dolly was newborn. She was just a few months old, and Mickey was a little over 3. So he says, but I connected that to we have been made right with God, right? This is a part of a relationship that God says this. He doesn't say it out of a void. He doesn't just go out into the world and says, I am God, listen to me. But rather he works with a group of people. In these days it was Israel. Now, with the church, it is that we are to be the lampstand. We are to be the voice of reason in a dark world, so that we don't tell people how to think, but we tell them what are God's thoughts, because God has shared those things with us out of grace. This is the grace of knowing. It's not just that we can know God, but God has made himself known so that we can share him with other people. And he says, and you shall love the Lord your God. Love, again, love is not, in biblical terms, a feeling. It's not void of feeling, but it's a decision to do what is best for others, regardless of what it costs you. Now with God it was a little bit different, because it's not regardless of what it cost him, it's knowing what it would cost him. God still loved people, right? And he says, with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. That's a whole person, right? It's with your body, with what you do, with what you think, and how that body expresses itself in every arena of life. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Bobby? Arena of life? It sounded smart when it was coming out.
Cool,
But yeah, all right, we'll stick to that. Then he says, then you shall teach them. He says, talk about them, bind them, write them. It's interesting because when he taught, the Jewish people have this leather strap that they tie around their hand to remind them specifically of this. And then they also wear this little box, and it has, I don't know if it's the Shema or the 10 Commandments in there, and they wear that across their forehead, so it's actually a little box on their forehead and on their hand. But God didn't mean for them to do something literally. Now, if you need that as a reminder, why not? Right? Years ago, people wore the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelet, and for some people, it was just a fashion statement to say, look, I am a Christian. But for others, it really stopped them before they made a decision to think, how would Jesus respond to this person, this situation? How would Jesus perform this particular act, whether it was schoolwork or housework or yard work, and it made people think. So that was a good thing. But what God is really saying, in everything that you think and everything that you do, that's why it was hand and that's why it was forehead. So it should permeate every part of our life, every part of us, every part of our life. If you have any questions or comments or complaints, make sure you type them up. Dahlia and Bobby and Dahlia Jr., so they say Dahlia Solomon, is at their phones out, so they'll be able to say. So this idea of purpose or the why, think about what Jesus says in verse 37 of Matthew 22. Jesus replied. Now there were the religious people that came to him and said, "What?" They wanted to entrap him. They wanted to catch him. And he said, "What is the greatest commandment?" And then Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the greatest commandment. And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself." So they would have recognized this as the Shema, or the listen, or the hear, right? That they've been reciting and they have memorized. They say every day, right? But then he also says, and the second is just as important, or equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So this is loving, choosing to do or to act in a certain way toward God with purpose and on purpose, right? Having him in mind, regardless of what it costs you, with your whole being, heart, soul, mind. And he says the second is just as important, because it's not just what I do, because some people would say, well, you do you, I'll do me, right? Just you. If that's okay for you, it's okay. Let me do what I'm going to do. But if I'm part of loving your neighbor, if you look back in the book of Leviticus, it's telling your neighbor when they're doing something they should not, because that in and itself incurs the wrath of God on that individual. If not in real time, now, then in eternity, they will be paying more for that particular sin. So loving your neighbor is not just passively waving to them or bringing them cookies. Those are great things. But loving your neighbor sometimes could mean walking over to them and saying, man, you are, let me tell you, I know you're not a Christian, and let me tell you about Jesus, so on and so forth. He says, what you're doing, this is heading you in a bad direction, and it is sin. Right? And I'm not saying this is easy, but it is part of what God has already said. So the purpose is very practical. This is to be lived out in every day. It's not just you and God, but it is as God and you, and then it moves out to other people in the world. So this is the why God gives us religion, not just the law, but religion, so that we would be able. The book of James puts it this way. He says this is real religion, taking care of widows and orphans. It's as practical as it gets. And if you think about the book of James and how early on it came in epistles and where the people were, that was about as important as it could be, because people were displaced. There was people who were taken out of Jerusalem, and they're put all over the place, and they lost property and money and status. And they're saying, now take care of one another. So what about practice? It's what we do with what we know or what we think and say and do. He says, Paul, in the book of Philippians, says, so then, my beloved, and I love this because this is verse 12. This is already getting to the bottom of the chapter. He starts off the chapter by saying, if there's anything that you've gained from me, and I'm paraphrasing here, but go back and read it. Basically, if there's anything that you've gained from me, he says, may it be the same with you, that you'd be of the same mind. But then he says that you would be humble and of the same mind. And then he talks about, it goes into this long portion talking about Jesus himself, who although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to hold on to or to grasp, but rather he emptied himself and he took on the form of a bond servant. That's the lowest of servants, a servant of servants. And he says, who humbled himself and took on death, not just death, but death on the cross. And then God exalted him and gave him the name above all names. At that name, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, those on the earth, in the earth, under the earth, to the glory of God the Father. And then he says this, so then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only. Think about that. I've heard someone say integrity is what you do when no one else is looking. And I love that, because it's not just what you do when no one else is looking, but it's who you are and how you live that out, right? Not only in my presence only, but now, much more in my absence. Work out, not work for. Work out your salvation. You are saved. God has saved you. So now out of that, you're not looking for love. You're not looking for external peace, but out of that peace of God that you have with Jesus Christ, out of that salvation that was bought for you by the blood of Christ, out of that, work out of your salvation with fear and trembling. Some people would say just as fear as to be reverence, but it also has to do with a genuine fear. But like John says in 1 John, that love is the ultimate goal, right? So the fear of God is a good thing, but the love of God is so much greater. The fear of God may stop you or even make you go a little backwards, but the love of God will propel you forward with fear and trembling, for it is God. So he says, work out. But then he says this, for it is God who has at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So there are things that God is going to push you toward, that he's going to change your mind first, right? Your desire first, your will first, and then to work. So it is God working in and through you. So if you ever do something that you say, mira, look at me, just take a 2 steps back and take a tic-tac. No, I'm just kidding. God is the one that should be glorified at all times. Listen, if something goes wrong, it's my fault and I know it. If something goes right, God should be praised. And if I take praise for it for myself, I should be very careful because God has a way of humbling people, making sure that they know, look. Don't take credit for the things that I do. So now getting to the nitty gritty, some of you know who these shadows are, right? They've been in the news for the past couple of weeks. We have Kamala Harris and is it Mike Pence?
Yeah.
Right? And Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. And we had a debate with the presidential debate, and then we had the vice presidential debate this past Wednesday. But I want to talk a little bit about politics. And this is how our religion is expressed. There was one of our students, I'm not going to name names, but she was very, 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 very vocal and very, very, very rude, using rude hand gestures and rude and foul language, screaming. Now she posted this, so it's out there. I shouldn't be ashamed or hold back on talking about it, because this is something that she wanted everybody to see, because she put it out there, and she recorded this particular debate here. And when it came to abortion, she says, "Keep your politics," and she was pointing, not with the pointing finger, to this gentleman right here, and saying, "Keep your politics, keep your religion out of politics. Keep your religion out of politics. Keep your religion out of politics," in a very angry voice. So I'm not going to judge her, because I don't know. I haven't talked to her personally. Where this is being fueled from. It's always better to have a conversation, right? But my point is not to call out an individual. And I should have said individual. I should not have said a girl, because now you're wondering, who is that girl? Let me look through social media. It's not important. The point is, should our religion, what we genuinely believe be worked out in politics, in policy, in how people make laws? Should Christians be involved in how people make laws? And if we are not, I say yes, because if we are not, then we will let people that think completely different than us live out what they believe in this world, which will be very different than what we believe. And the world will look very different. So you need people to represent believers and unbelievers alike, so that their voices would be heard, so that there would be, the country would move in a particular direction. And Bobby, if you could write this down, maybe we'll look it up later. There was one of the crafters of the Constitution, and even then some of you would say the Constitution is garbage, and there are a bunch of male chauvinists, and they had slaves, and listen, we can get into that another time. But one of them said that when they were crafting the Constitution, something along the lines of, if people are not religious, this Constitution is worthless. Right? He understood, and not all of them were believers, but they understood part of having good laws is having good moral character. And they believed part of that good moral character came from a relationship with God, or at least being a person who reads the Bible or goes to church, or so on and so forth. Now, if you have questions or comments or complaints, I'm not afraid of them. Write them down. Listen, I would rather you write them down and we talk about them, either privately, if that's what you want, or publicly here, or I'll invite you to my home, and our next segment could be you sitting right next to me and we can talk about them, right? Not argue about them, but talk about them. But get those things out, right? And I don't mean on Twitter. I don't mean on Instagram. I don't mean on Facebook, right? That's not a place that you want to do that, because it could be, you will lose family. Not just friends, family. There have been families divided that no longer speak to one another based on where they stand, whether it's immigration or climate, abortion, justice, taxes, COVID. Did I put this in here?
Race.
race, right?
Is not in there.
Racism. So justice, I kind of had that in mind when I talked about justice. So the how we live out our life, our politics, or how we view the world, how we form our opinions, should be based not just on people and how we feel about people and their actions, but based on what God has declared very, very clearly. It was an excellent program yesterday I was listening to, and the guy was saying, look, God cares about immigration. God has talked about caring about people who are displaced. But the Bible doesn't lay out exactly for each country. For Israel, he gave very specific about people coming in and where they can go and how they can settle and how they're going to live where they are. But God does not talk for the United States. He doesn't talk for Australia or other countries in the world. He was talking to his people, and that we would be a light to other nations. A light to other nations. As much as we like to think, the United States of America is not a Christian nation. It didn't take the place of Israel. There are Christians in America, but not all Americans are Christians, just as there are Christians everywhere else. Right? We need to be very careful when we take and assume God's promises to Israel and make them promises to America. They're not promises to America. There might be principles there for us, but they are not promises to America. So I don't know. We have 4 people in the room, or 3 people besides me. Is there any questions or comments or complaints you have about this? Because I'm kind of looking at my phone, but I don't think there's any. Martín Hernandez writes, el trompudo. El trompudo. So he's talking about Trump, and trompudo in Spanish means the powder. Right, the powder. So
He pouts.
we were playing a game where you had to do charades, and one of the cards was Trump, and it was easy because they just put their hand over their head and went like this, and it was like Trump, and they got it real good. So we'll say that and leave it alone. Yes.
So a couple of days ago, I was watching the 6th congressional district debate.
Yes.
I guess it's something that's going on. That's pretty big because it's kind of all over the news, even though we don't know about the western suburbs too much.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a woman who obviously, or not obviously, is a Christian, but has a religious background. And the man who is a Democrat is not a believer. And I believe he's currently the one that she's running against. But anyway, he made a point to say how, to say something like, how dare you have no moral upright values to a Christian woman because she doesn't believe in abortion or certain things. What does moral values mean? And can you have moral values without Christianity?
That's a very, very strange question, because I would imagine that question always came in the opposite order. I would think that you can but that moral values come from a religious perspective. And not just Christian, but Muslim, Buddhist. I learned about a fascinating religion I never heard of before called Jainism, that these people are very moral. Their whole premise as a religion is how to live well in the world that you are in. So I don't. It's interesting that they would put it that way.
That's why when I was watching the debate, I was confused by his thinking of what moral values are, because he was stating that he has moral values because he believes in certain things, but she doesn't because she has a religious background, which really confused me, because I'm not sure he understood what moral values are and where they come from.
It could be, and it would have been nice to be there to ask the question, but we're not, so we have to, kind of guess, right? But here's the thing that I would like to say, or for us to remember, is that although the United States is not a Christian nation, there were a lot of Christian principles or biblical principles that went into the reason this nation was made in the first place, right? So at its inception it was, and it was flawed, right? Obviously, it was flawed, even as it is flawed now. But that was the idea, and a lot of it permeated the United States of America. So much so that now, when you pull religion out, and when there's less and less religious people in the United States of America, maybe by name, but not in practice, right? Or refuse to live out their Christianity in the public circle, at work, at school, in politics. Those, because people, that was its base. That's why our country looks the way it does, right? Mm-hmm. That's why people have a certain mindset. We have freedoms. We have freedoms that are ours, and I think that comes from that biblical foundation that we had, even though that foundation remains, but the name is no longer there. Yes.
I also think there's a lot of confusion on what the definition of this is, but I hear a lot of people say, well, where's this separation of church and government? So they believe that church should have no involvement in government.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that is in the Constitution, but in the Constitution of Russia, not ours.
Oh, really?
It's literally worded that way, and Bobby, make note of that, we'll find that. Because there's that idea, but the idea was to protect religion, not to keep us from the state. Because they came from a place, right, to settle here in the United States, because over there, church and state were one. And they were told what to do and how to worship and what they could do and what could not do. So here there's a freedom. And we value that freedom of religion, even to the point to give people freedom that most people would say, don't do that. But because we have a freedom of religion in our Constitution, they give the freedom for supremacists to voice their views, to have parades, even though most people would say that's to be condemned and you shouldn't give them permits for that. The state cannot do that because they have to give them the freedom to express their freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? And that's something that we value here, and that Christians, even though they don't believe the same as a Muslim or as a Buddhist or as a Hindu, we would still fight for the freedom of their religion to express it here, because that's part of our Constitution, and we live here in America. So this is how our religion, specifically being a Christian, and how that informs my decisions. It would inform my decision to fight for the right of others to express their religion, even though it's different than mine.
So you're saying that separation of church and government is more to protect the church, so that government doesn't have a say on how your church should be run or what should it believe.
Exactly.
But it doesn't mean Christians can't be involved in politics.
Exactly. Like in China, there are state-sanctioned churches, but they're controlled, and there's only so much you can say and so much you can do. There are a large group of underground churches that say we can't allow the
government.
the government to tell us what to believe, so we will have to do it in secret, at least for now. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any other questions, comments, complaints? Bobby's writing all kinds of notes. We're getting ready to film for Tuesday, so that we can talk a little bit more about this on a Wednesday. Man,
Wednesday.
Wednesday. I'm gonna tattoo it to my forehead backwards, so when I look in the mirror, it'll be right side up. So, purpose, practice, and politics. If you have been made right with God, your lives should be centered on Him and not you. Then this new identity should permeate every part of your life, all that you think, say, and do. Listen, we will continue to preach the gospel, right? The gospel that God made a perfect world, that man messed up, sinned against God, brought sin into the world, and it affects everything and everyone from the beginning of time till now. But that God seen we couldn't fix this ourselves and sent his son to die in the place of sinners, so that if someone understands they are a sinner, receives Christ as Savior, that their sin would be forgiven forever. Right? We need to continue preaching that, because that is not just the good news for salvation, but it's the good news for sanctification, for how our life is being made like Jesus throughout the time that we are living in these bodies, and we are either in the presence of God or God gives us new bodies. Either way, we are going to be in a body forever. Forever. We will be in a physical body, maybe different than this, but it is part of God's plan from the beginning, and it is part of God's plan even in the very end and through and into eternity. Not part of today's lesson, but I thought I'd throw that in there. All right? With that said, I think we are done. If you have any questions or comments or complaints, like I said, we're going to be talking about this Tuesday as well. And Bobby and I are going to sit right next to each other, and he'll start with some history, I believe, and how history has informed or came into our politics of today, and then a little bit about the lesson as well. But we'll bounce back and forth and ask each other questions, sometimes thinking about you, or not sometimes, always thinking about you, but sometimes thinking in your place and thinking maybe a student would be thinking about this, and I could pose that question to Bobby, or Bobby could pose it to me, but be thinking about questions yourself and what you would want to ask on that particular day as well. So I believe we have something silly for you, and then we will be closed for the day. But before that, let's bow our heads and let us pray. Father, thank you for the grace of knowing that you have made us in your image, male and female, that you give us the capacity to think and to feel and to choose, and that you want us to incorporate all of that to be directed toward you, but also directed toward the world that you have placed us in. Thank you for all the wonderful things that we can enjoy, even in this sin-cursed world, and we look forward to what it will be like when there is no sin in the world. Father, we thank you for each student and each parent who has hopped on this live broadcast, and that we're able to sing freely, and we're able to share your word freely. We're able to have a copy of your word. Let us never ever forget this grace given to us by you. We do thank you for our time together, and we ask your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, here we go. Me, cashew.
Cashew.
Mm.
No. You've had enough. Your breakfast is gone. Move on. No, you'll get more tonight at supper. You are not starving. No,
I
you're
know the
not.
feeling.
You're on a diet. No. No more breakfast. Listen. Cashew, you're on a diet because you're a little chubby, okay? No. Do you want a snack? Like, maybe an ice cube?
That's cold-blooded.
Or cashew. I could relate. But I'm still eating what I want. All right. That said, we're going to have this song playing till its very end, and then we